Okay, welcome, friends. It is week 4, lecture 2. We are halfway through our halfway point. Couple little bit of housekeeping. I say this before every class, but you have discussion questions that are due Sunday. You've got core assignments. There's 3 of them that are due this week, Sunday, 11:59 p.m. PDT. Just as a reminder, it is a break week next week. So if we're looking at next week, it is a break week. So nothing will be there's no discussion questions, no core assignments, nothing. So if you are falling behind on core assignments, this is a great time to catch up. This is when you should catch up because you got this extra week. And then also, if you want to move forward, I would say that this is a great time also to move forward. That way you can really prep because the week kind of coming into it is our first exam. And then honestly, just being transparent, this is like the holiday season and people start getting stressed and you're traveling, you're doing a whole bunch of stuff. And our last week is the week before Christmas and a whole bunch of stuff. So just the easier it is, the better. So make sure that you are, or sorry, the faster you can do it, the better. If you ever do want to, let's say that you crush it over this week and you work ahead and you're crushing it, and let's say you've already done 11 of the core assignments, you can email me and I'll check that. And if you do qualify, I can give you the exam early. That's okay with me. I'm fine with doing that. So if you guys did want to work this week and you wanted to just like kind of work ahead and you feel confident, that's the big thing. Remember, you do have 3 chances, but if you feel confident and you say, hey, Will, on Monday, you send me an email. Email is probably going to be the easiest way to get in contact with me on that. So shoot me an email, say, hey, I'm ready. I've already done this. I've done my 11 assignments. I'll go check them. And as long as you have done that, then I can send you an exam code. Just on that, the exam, you have 24 hours to do the exam. If you want to get a red or qualify for a red or a black belt, then you have to do it within 5 hours. Anything outside of 5 hours, so 5 hours and 1 minute, it is going to be an orange belt, which is still great. You should know that the colors do not, companies don't know the colors, just going to be blunt. So unless if that's something you're striving for, then that's awesome. I encourage you, go for it. But don't beat yourself up if you go 6 hours, but you crush the exam. Like that's still very, very good. The black belt just has some extra functionality. As a reminder, you no longer have to deploy. So that's not part of it. That's not part of the requirement anymore. So if you do want to go for a black belt, you do have some extra functionality you have to do, but you do not have to deploy. And you have 24 hours. Once you insert the code will be good all the way through Tuesday. So it's not like you have 24 hours from when I give you the code. It'll be good through Tuesday of week 8. So to get whenever is most optimal for you. Okay, last thing is here at Coding Dojo, we do love to give surveys. And so one thing that we do, there's really 2 surveys that are really, really, really important for us per stack, per full stack language, which Python, Java, and MERN. We have 2 of them, and any of the other ones, we only have 1. And these are our mid-stack surveys and our end-of-stack surveys. What's important about these ones comparative to like the ones on the platform that are just like, hey, how are you doing? Is these ones give us an indication of what I could be doing better. So, or what I am doing well, or what Garrett's doing well. And so what this is a survey basically on us and on the content. And so what it allows us to see is, and I read every single comment, I read every single one. So I do not pander to try to get good comments. If there's things I can work on, I want to improve my craft. I want to be a better instructor. Please let me know that. If there's things I'm doing well, that's also helpful because my bosses also see this. But please, again, do however you feel. But it would be really, really helpful if you guys would do this. I'm going to put it in the chat here. But again, it's really, really, really helpful if you guys can do that. It takes about 5 to 10 minutes. Tomorrow during class, technically, I'm supposed to give some time, so I will. We'll give about 5 minutes for you guys to take this survey. And again, it's reflective on Garrett and I, how we're doing, how you're feeling like the class is going, and what we could be doing better and or what we're doing really well already. So if you guys could do me a favor and fill that out, that would be really awesome. I'll be sending an email on that as well. But that'd be great and super helpful for me. Okay. Enough of that. Yesterday we talked all about React Router. We did use Navigate. We talked about use params. In the office hour, we started going through the Luke API walker, where we're kind of using a lot of these tools. That is recorded. So once class is done, I will make sure that I put that right here. And so that was officially us kind of putting a bookend on our front end. I'm going to start calling this and referring to our front end as our client side. Because the way that it's going to work is we are now moving into a new realm. We have dealt with, let me kind of pull up my annotation tools. We have kind of done a few things. We have built our client, our front end. Let me just build this out and then we'll go there. Perfect. Okay. So here's our entire project. Entire project. I'm going to call this a full stack app. Perfect. We have just dealt so far with our client. So that's kind of like React / reach router and all the different things that we've done. Now, today we're going to start dealing with our server side, and that's going to be like Express / node. And then eventually on, I think tomorrow, actually, we're introducing it. We have one more little portion. We'll come right here, and then we'll have our MongoDB. Perfect. But right now, we've already dealt with our first kind of portion with this client React or React side, and that was on localhost 5173. So this is its own sort of, think about it like a server that is being ran, that we have, that's going to be up and running, spun up. Our computer is running this. Now we are going to be moving into our backend today, and that is going to be done on localhost 8000. And so, as you can see, obviously, we're going to have two servers spun up and ran. So I will typically start referring anytime I build a Vite project outside of, we're not building one today, but if we were, anytime I have that, I'm going to call it client, because that's going to be my client portion, my client server. And then in the back end, I'm going to refer to or build a folder called server. So we're going to have our client and our server. One is our front end, one is our back end, and then we're going to have some middleware that's going to be able to allow us to actually create and handle requests between the two servers. So that's what we're doing. We are now, like if we're building out an actual project, we're going to have a folder that has everything in there. So how I have like a lecture 2 folder, and then within that, I'm going to build out my client and my server. And so that's my full stack application. It's a folder that's housing all of that. We will need to have 2 servers running eventually. We're not going to need that for a couple of days when we start dealing with full stack, I believe in week 5. But we will need to have multiple terminals. Ooh, that's gross, sorry. Multiple terminals. You can have one that rests in your GitHub or your VS Code, another one on your terminal. You could have 2 windows in your terminal. We'll kind of see that when we get there. But this is kind of where we're going and what we're doing. We've already crushed this side. We're going to introduce this side and this side tomorrow, and then we're going to put it all together. Any questions on this? Any questions on just kind of, I know we've seen this visualization before. This is not something new to us, but just wanted to show you kind of how it works. Are there any questions on that? Put a 1 in the chat if this is all gravy. Thanks, Joseph. Promise less errors today, Joseph. We're going to do it, man. Okay. Thanks. I'm also coding a lot less. So we'll be all right. Cool. Okay. before we jump in, there's a couple of just things I wanted to talk about. There's some great slides that my friend Kaden, who's also an instructor, created and sent me. So I wanted to go through these a little bit. Also, just another way to kind of, if you learn by slides, this is a great way to kind of learn as well. But wanted to review some HTTP methods. We are dealing with CRUD, right? And so we're creating, we're reading, we're updating, and we're deleting. And we've already looked at the different methods that we have in order to handle those, right? And so what we can do is, let's go here and associate the two. When I am dealing with CRUD and I've got a post, whoa, whoops, wrong thing, sorry. I've got a want to deal, that's on me again. My annotate tool did not show up. Okay, now we should be good. I want to deal with my post or my create, that is obviously my post method. When I'm dealing with my reading or getting one or getting all, that's obviously my get method. And when I am dealing with my updating, that's put. There's another one other than put. Does anybody remember what the other one is? Extra points if you do. Yeah, exactly, Brittany. It's patch. Great job, Brittany, Johnny. Yeah, it's patch. So we can have put or patch. And then the last one is our delete. And that is obviously delete. Now just notice that with our get, we can have our reading. We can have it to where we're getting one or we're getting all. That's going to kind of vary. That's going to be a very common thing, or getting a few of them, or getting the ones that only, start with the letter H, whatever. But just wanted to review these methods so that way we can see this is CRUD, right? And so we're creating, reading, updating, deleting. That is the main portion of your exam. You're going to have to be able to do CRUD. So you're going to have to create something, read something, update something, and delete something. If you can't do that, you won't pass the exam. That is kind of the crux of it all. So just wanted to reiterate and show you what those were. Cool. Now, we're going to talk about sort of what is a server. And so I've said that we dealt with our client, that's our front end, and now we're dealing with our back end, right? And I've called that our server. Really, all a server is just a computer that has software installed on it, which for us is going to be Express and Node, to allow us to handle requests from a client. So handle requests from a client. And so big commercial servers, ones that you have on AWS, on Azure, on GCP, those are built to handle thousands, if not millions of requests every second. There's things called load balancers that really help out with that. That's way too granular. We don't need to talk about it, but that's really what is happening is all these cloud computing. It's funny because though we call it cloud computing, it's really the same. There's no new technology there. It's just servers in a different building versus servers in our own building. So we don't have it in the cloud yet. I am thinking at some point, Elon Musk is going to do something. He's going to put like servers on the moon connected with Starlink. I trust that eventually the cloud will be in the clouds. But for right now, we don't have that technology. We're not there yet. And so everything is kind of built in its own building. In fact, some of them are actually in the ocean, which is kind of crazy because they use a lot of power, so they generate a lot of heat. So they actually use the ocean to cool down the servers. Obviously, they're in a watertight container. But a little fun fact for you. Also, if you didn't know, the internet is just a bunch of cables across the world that go through the ocean. That's how everything's connected. It's wild. You should look up how the internet works or internet map. It's wild. But that's something different. We don't need to talk about that. So pretty much any computer can be turned into a server. Our computer is going to have multiple servers on it. So, you can have a Mac Mini is like actually a really popular way that a lot of people have their own home server because they're not very expensive and they can just host and run stuff. And so we're going to be using our Node.js, which we've already installed. You should have already installed it like week one, day one. And that allows us to run our JavaScript code outside of the browser. So that way we can actually host and have this server. And we're going to be using a tool called Express, which is just a web application framework. So it's just basically a software that allows us to kind of, you can kind of think about it as like like an exoskeleton of this, right? That allows us to get the shape and understand what this is going to be and how our application is going to run. And then we can build and modify however we want to do that. Cool. I don't think there's any other slides I wanted to. Nope, that's it. Okay. Okay, great. This is what we did in office hour. So, and we talked about JavaScript as well. So let's jump in to kind of what this looks like. Now we're officially in the Express section of our platform. And you're going to see some of the same things, like what is an API that was already in the React section. We're just reiterating what an API is. Application programming interface, really just a way that we can interact with some sort of data or some sort of other application. Postman, which we've already talked about, we are going to be using Postman. So if you haven't downloaded it yet, I would encourage you to. I'm going to be using it today. But if you haven't, you can see its download here, and we can deal with that. We've already talked about HTTP verbs. So let's jump into Express. Okay. So first off, what we need to do is we need to go and we need to create our actual project. So let me CD back. Okay, so I'm going to mkcd, which is the same thing as mkdir. And then once I create it, I then cd into it. It's just my shortcut. mkcd, I'm going to say server. Perfect. ls. Okay. Now, in this, I'm going to touch, and I'm going to say server.js. Server.js. There we go. So I'm creating a file called server.js. I come back and I'm going to code. Oh, actually, I already have it. I don't need to code. Dang it. Sorry. It's already here. So now I have this file and I have this server.js. Great. I want to make sure that I am updating or I am installing everything. And so if I were to go to Express documentation, it's going to have me first and foremost create a package JSON file. So the way that we can do that is I'm going to cd into my server, and I'm going to say npm init-y. This is going to initialize a package JSON file. Remember, a package JSON file is just the blueprint. So if somebody's looking at my application or looking at, they want to basically come and say, okay, I want to use this code. This is saying, cool, if you're going to use this, here's everything you're going to need. Everything you're going to need. So we want to make sure we npm init-y. Cool. So now all I have to do is I can npm I or npm install, your choice, they're the same thing. And I say express. And now that I've done that, I get express here. And you can see that I get my node modules. I get a whole bunch of stuff. Now this is a new step. Oh, this is all new steps so far, but this is another step that we need to make sure that we do. Within my server, I want to, and so I can say touch, and that's going to create a new file. I also come here, create a new file as well. I'm going to create something called a getignore. What this getignore does is, if I were to upload this to GitHub, which I eventually will, this is going to say, cool, if you don't want something to be uploaded to GitHub, you can put it in your getignore. And so Git, your repository, the name's slipping me, but a version control system. Sorry, I don't know why I couldn't think about that. What I'll say, if there's anything in my getignore, I'm just going to ignore that, and I'm not going to kind of save that, put that up there. So node modules is huge. We don't want to do that. You're going to get in, like, you're not going to get in trouble, but GitHub might be like, dude, what are you doing? This is like a rookie thing. Don't do this. So we want to create a .getignore. Whenever we use Vite, or if you're still using Create React App, this is automatically created for you, right? There's already a getignore, but because we're sort of building this out ourselves, we need to create it ourselves. So all I say is node modules, modules. Perfect. And so now, if as long as these match, which they do, is if I update or upload this to GitHub, it is going to grab all this information except my node modules. And so I can, it's just saving space. Or if it's just saving space. So we want to ignore that. Definitely. If you are still uploading assignments, not via GitHub, though, I would encourage you need to start doing GitHub. Still make sure that now this is another node modules you have to go in and delete and remove before you upload to the platform. So we say git ignore node modules. And now we have our package.json, we have Express, and now we are ready. Oops, I'm not sure why that did that. But now we're ready to start looking at what is going on and how do we use this code? How do we set up our server? How do we set all of that information up? Cool. So I've got a couple notes here. So I'm going to build this out and then we'll have some notes here. First and foremost, in the same way that we import things from React Router DOM, if we want to use them, importing on the front end is us saying, hey, I want to bring in this information. The way we do this on the back end is we say the word require. And so what we're going to do is we're going to say const express. We've already installed that, right? Equals require express. And so this just basically means to import express. Saying, hey, now that I've called that, or I have this, it's part of my dependency, I want to go ahead and use that. Now, this const express is just a function. And so it's a top level function. And so what we're doing here is I'm saying, okay, this const app, we want to create an instance of this express, right? It denotes and creates an instance. It calls what we call our top level function by the express module, and it creates an instance of that, and we save that as app. So that's something that's important. If you save it as anything other than app, then you're going to have to maybe, make some adjustments, right? Because this is just what we named it. And the last thing we want to do is we want to say const port equal, and we're not going to say 3000, we're going to say 8000. And we are setting our port to this. This is normal for Node.js. 3000 is create React app. Now, can you use 3000? I believe so. Unless you're using create React app, then you can't. Obviously, you couldn't use like 5173 because it's trying to listen on these other things and it's going to get confused that way. So we want to use 8000. We know that is fine. If you use like 5000 and you're on a Mac, I believe 5000 is taken up now. So you need to change it to like 5001, but just stick with 8000. You should be A-okay. You guys probably dealt with that in Python. So I think Flask still runs on 5000. So, okay. So we are saying, hey, I want to import Express. I want to instantiate the top level function for Express. Basically, I want to create my actual application. And I want it listening, or I want it on this specific port when I start my server. Cool. Now, the last thing we need to do is I need to go into, and this will be at the bottom, is I say app.listen, app.listen, and I'm going to give my port, and then I say listening on port, whatever. Now, one thing I want to note is you don't have to put this here. Now, if you're referring to port in multiple areas, like in this case, I am. So I'm going to create a variable. If I didn't, I could just put 8000 right here. That would also work. So if I did not have this, I could just put 8000. Now I would have to obviously affect this and just say, listening or whatever. But that would work. So you might see it that way in like the jungle, the real world. But I like creating variables just to kind of keep track of stuff, because again, I'm using port here, and that's usually a very good rule of thumb. If you're using it more than one place, create a variable, create a function. Cool. And so what this does is it allows me to say, okay, it is listening on port, and then it should be port 8000. Okay, great. Any questions so far? I have two more things I have to do, but is there any questions so far on setting up our express value, our express backend? There is a boilerplate code that you can download if you want to, and then open it up. And then that's when you just say npm install. Now we built it from the ground up. Just wanted to show you that. So that way you can, I like building it myself because I have a little bit more control. But if you wanted to kind of have like a boilerplate, that's also available here. And then you just have to run npm install because it already has a package JSON for you. Cool. Now, we're not gonna get to this part yet. There's some middleware I want to handle first and foremost, and then we will kind of get going and running. Cool. So again, make sure app.listen is on the very bottom. That's the last thing that you have. Cool. Now we also have some middleware that we can use. So I'm gonna say app.use. And this is gonna be express JSON. And this is gonna allow us to pass JSON or deal with JSON when we are dealing with our code, right? And we're gonna start making requests and getting responses, and those responses are gonna be in JSON. So this is a really important middleware just to say, hey, when we are doing this or when we receive this, we can handle that as well. I see somebody in the chat said, what was the command after npm init y? You just put that in there and that'll create your package JSON. And then we install express after. So npm I express. That's what that did. Now, the second one we're going to use, and it's not really, the granularity is not that, you don't really need to understand and or know that, but we're going to use express URL encoded. So that returns middleware that only parses URL encoded bodies and only looks at requests where the content type header matches the type option. So that, again, understanding the granularity, not necessary for this course, but we do need this piece of middleware within this as well. So put these two right there, so that way we can deal with this and it can have the correct, so it can read JSON, handle JSON, and then have the correct responses or requests there. Okay. Now we're going to actually start building our routes. Great. So I have this app here. And in the same way that if you remember when we dealt with our first routes, we just had some sort of base thing. So we had like localhost 5173/, and then we changed it, right? Where we had, I think yesterday, I can't even remember what we had, but we had certain things. What we're going to do here is same thing. We already are on port 8000. So localhost 8000 is implied. That is my base route. So what I need to do is I need to handle and make sure that I have access to my other ones. And this is where Postman is going to come in, because we're going to start building routes and we're going to test with Postman because we don't have a front end. So this is where you're going to have to use Postman in order for us to make sure that this works well. So this is how we're going to handle it. So we're going to say app.get. And what this does is it takes in a few things. This is a function that takes in a few things. First, it takes in what is the path we want to go to? Remember, it's localhost / something. Usually a good one to start with is API. After, we have what we call a request and response callback function, right? And so you could call this request or you could call this response if you wanted, but it is just a callback function. And what will happen is we will make this request here, and we don't really deal with rec until we get to post, when we're dealing with a post request, because we need like our rec.body. So it's always gonna, you need to have it, but with get, it's always gonna be kind of like this. So, but we make our request, and it's going to, we're deciding when somebody makes the request to localhost 8000, what is our response going to be? What is our response going to be? And so we're saying, hey, we want to respond with a JSON object. That JSON object is going to have a key of message and a value of hello world. So when somebody goes, because we're creating our server, we're creating our own API. When somebody comes to this specific route, in the same way with the Luke Skywalker, they say, hey, when somebody comes to swappy.dev, whatever, /planet/1, this is the response. We're saying, hey, when somebody goes to localhost 8000 /API, this is what we want to respond with. Cool. So now if I say Postman, and open this up, nothing's going to happen yet, because though I've created my backend in my server, I'm not running it, right? In the same way that I can create a lot of Vite code, but until I say npm run dev, it's not doing anything. So what we need to do is we need to start our server. Let me try to make that bigger so that you guys can see. Okay. What we want to do is we want to navigate into our server folder. And I want to ls, right? A very common mistake is people will be one level too high, and then they'll try to run this and it's going to fail and it's not going to work. I'll do this real quick to show you, and then we'll actually CD into the server and see it. But there's two things we can do. There's a tool that we can use called NodeMon. Now, the reason we want to do this is because if I were to say node server.js, right? We're saying, hey, we want to run this file, the file that creates my application, my Express application. First off, this is going to be my error. It's going to give me module not found. If you get this error, that means, hey, you're in the wrong folder. Because if I ls, I don't have access to this server.js file. And so if you ever get this error, that's what that means. You're in the wrong folder. Nothing's broken. Just cd into server. I do this all the time, so I can guarantee you'll probably do it. I mean, this is like what every developer does. And then now if we say node space server.js, we get our listening on port 8000. Great, that rules. But what an issue is if I were to change anything, this starts it and listens, and that's it for the one time, right? But if I were to change anything, if I were to update my code, I want it to be able to update. I want my server to keep doing that. I don't want to keep having to run my server every single time I make a change. So there is a tool called NodeMon that you can install. The way that you install it is you just go in to your computer and say npm install -g means globally. So it's not just tied to this folder. That means anywhere, you only have to do it one time. You don't have to do it for every assignment. You only have to do it one time. And then anytime you say NodeMon, then that works just fine. And then you say NodeMon. So you're saying, hey, globally install NodeMon. And then now after you run that code, anytime you say NodeMon after that, it's going to know what you're doing, depending, you don't have to do it every single file. This is fine. This is good. Like, this works just fine. This is a little antiquated though, because, I mean, I have it downloaded on mine, but Node actually recognized that, hey, this was an issue, because who wants to keep running their server? So the other option, so you have two options. NodeMon works great. So I could say NodeMon server.js, and we see listening on port 8000. Perfect. That worked great. What I could also do, I need to update it too, but reason I haven't updated it, because I could say node-s watch server.js. This is not in the platform. This is just a little nugget for you. But I could do node-s watch server.js, and this is doing the same thing. And it's going to update anytime I change it. It'll update. So you could use either one. If you want to use NodeMon, if you want to use node-s watch, they both do the same exact thing. Cool. So let's actually go. Our server's running. We're good. We're listening on port 8000. That's what we need to see. If it wasn't, we would have seen an error like we did. So now let's actually go to Postman, and we're going to go and we're going to get rid of this. and let's make a GET request. We're going to say to HTTP :// local host 8000 / API. Now this is a GET request. I can change the request type here. This is a GET request. And then what I'm doing is I'm sending a request and I get back a response, right? So I have officially created an API that anybody, I mean, if I was running it, if I were to put it to where like on the cloud, and anybody could access it, then anybody could do this, right? Anybody could go to my specific URL / API and do a GET request, and then it would message hello world. So you have officially created a backend API. You've created a server. You should be very, very proud. Cool. I'm gonna stop there. Are there any questions on what we've done so far? We brought in Express, we instantiated it, we decided on which port we're doing, which 8000s are default. We brought in our middleware that allows us to give and use JSON, which is what you're going to want to use. Most APIs do. We've created our first route saying, hey, when you go to localhost 8000, now remember that is implied, that's your base route. So we just need the pathway after that. Takes in a request and a response, and we say, here's what we respond with when somebody goes that. Here's when I'm going to give it back. And then we're listening. And this is just app.listen. This is actually starting our server. This is actually running. So that's why it has to be at the very bottom. Okay. Any questions on what we've done? Ooh, that was gross. I'm sorry. Did not mean to do that. Regret that immediately. Okay. Okay. Somebody said, I got this. Node server.js body parser deprecated. Undefined. Extended option server.js listing on port. I would have to see exactly what you brought up, but maybe if you want to put your code in the chat, or just put your code to Garrett, and then maybe Garrett can kind of problem solve with you. Seems like, okay, so if you're saying node server.js, then there might be an issue. Remember, you need node -- watch server.js or nodemon server.js. Okay, sorry, my dog was acting unique, making sure she's not about to have a seizure. Okay, nope, we're good. Okay, now let's go ahead. We've done that. Now let's actually deal like we're dealing with some data, because this is fun to do like a GET request. But what if I want to get some actual values? Be kind of cool. So we're going to create just some information, and I've talked about this, I know, a million times, so I'm so sorry. But this is emulating a database. You're not going to have to do this in the long run. You will for Faker API, but once we get it in Mongo, then this is going to just emulate a database. But for right now, we're just going to hard code and kind of create our own database, if you will. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say const. We dealt with movies, so I'm going to say movies. And that's going to equal an array. And then let's just let Chat GPT. Oh, not going to do it for me. Rude. There we go. We got a title, Star Wars, Matrix, Lord of the Rings. And we'll do a couple more. That's fine. Let's actually, I want to type in an ID as well. So we're going to say 1. If you click on something and you hold the Alt or the Option key, it allows you to do multiple. So if I need to do the same thing, I can say ID. And then that is just a faster way to do it. 2, 3, okay. So we have this movies. We have this movies route, or this movies, sorry, not a route. This movies array that is full of movie objects, Star Wars, Lord of the Rings, 2000. I don't know if these are actually accurate. We'll see. ChatGPT can now scrape the web, so that's pretty, and we're just that much closer to the singularity and the downfall of man. Okay, so let's say that we wanted to get all movies. So I could create a route that does that same thing. So I say API/movies. It creates a request and a response. And I'm wanting to get, this means we'll get all movies. And now I'm wanting to get the movies. So let's deal with this. What we're doing, results is just what we are saying it. It's just, that's the key that we're creating. I could just say movies. Same. But I've got an error here because I need to do that. Yep, there we go. Cool. So now what I can do is I'm saying, hey, if I go to API/movies and make that request, I want to respond with some JSON with a key of movies, and it's going to be my actual value. So this array, so it's going to be a key of movies in the array of all my movies. So if I go to this and I say /API/movies and I send, great. So now this is the same thing that's going to happen when you, let me get this up a little bit. When you're dealing with, when you're dealing with a database, it's going to operate the same way. We're going to use this tool called Mongoose that's going to query our database for us. But what we're going to do is we're going to make a request. We're going to go query the database. It's going to give us back this, and we're going to give a response with all this information. So again, this is just simulating a database. We don't have a database yet. We haven't got there, but we can see that we can make a request and get some information, which is really cool. Now, let's say we wanted to add a movie here, and we're going to now get into our post request. We're not going to do update and delete yet today. I think that's probably too much. I want to make sure that we'll do post, and then we're going to walk through this again because I kind of have gone, just kind of gone. So I want to make sure that everybody understands. But let's go ahead and create a movie. Now, can anybody remember the HTTP method for creating something? Get was reading. What's the HTTP method? Yeah, Johnny, that's exactly it. It's post, right? It's post. I think Joseph, I think you came off mute. So assuming you were going to say post as well.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Genuinely, I'm like, yeah, you definitely can say that. Okay. So let's go ahead and create my route. So I'm going to say, let's say get all movies. And then I'm going to say, create a movie. Now, again, we're not dealing with a database. So we're just dealing with an array. So if I want to add something to the array, does anybody remember the array method that just adds something to the end of it? This is like week 1, maybe, or even web fund. To add something to the end. Yeah, it's push. Push. Great job. Cool. So all we're wanting to do is we want to take in a request, and we're going to have some information. And we want to take in that information and we want to push it to our array here, right? I'm going to take in this object, push it to our array. Great. So what I'm going to say is I'm going to say app.post, because now we're dealing with a post method. Cool. Now, one thing when dealing with methods is it is very common to have with a get and a post request to have the same the route movies. So in the same way that I have API/movies, I can still have API/movies. And because they're different HTTP method, the computer can hold it and separate them, because to the computer, they're totally separate. There's a get and a post. So these are the same. Just want to point this out. Though these are the same, because I've got a different method, I've got a get and a post, the computer is a-okay with that. They don't have to, every single one does not have to be individual. Now, if I was having another get that was going to have the same thing, that's where the error would come. That's where an issue would happen. And I'd have to have an individual for each type of method. So, you know, the get method cannot have two of the same. Gets have to be individualized. And the same thing with post, put, patch, and delete. They all have to be individualized. But I could have update, delete, get, and like update, patch, put, post, and get. In theory, they could all have the same exact one, and the computer would know based on what we're trying to do or what method we call. It would be able to differentiate between them and handle them correctly. So just wanted to point that out. So I'm going to use them as the same, just to reiterate the fact. Now I'm going to say, comma, and I am taking in still a request and response, right? But if you remember, I said that when we deal with a post method, we actually take in this request. So I'm going to console.log, just at the beginning, I'm going to console.log this request or rec. And then I still need some sort of response. So let me say res.json, create a movie. We're not going to do anything yet with it. Perfect. Cool. So I'm going to come here. And this is how, when we're dealing with Postman, this is how we add in some information or we make a request. We're going to come, I'm going to create a new one. And I'm going to come, and first and foremost, I'm going to say post. So I say http://localhost API movies. I can do that. That's great. Then I'm going to go into body. I'm going to click this raw button, and then I'm going to change it to JSON. And here I'm going to get kind of a blank canvas. So just to reiterate, I go from post, I click on this body header. Within body, I make sure I select raw. And then after that, I say JSON, right? Because I'm giving it a JSON object. Cool. So now I can do exactly that. I can pass in an object, and I have to make sure that the keys match what I'm currently dealing with. So I'm going to have ID, one, title, start, whatever, and then year. So I'm going to say ID. I might have to put this in quotes. We'll say 4. Title. You already know, I'm going to put Walter Mitty. I use this all the time, and I still don't know what year it was made. And then we just have year. And then I'm just going to say 2012. Yeah, that sounds great. Okay. Did not mean to save. Okay. So now what should happen is when I send this, I will go and it'll take this request. I'm going to console log the request. And then we're just going to respond with create a movie. We'll say created a movie. Okay. So we send it in and we get a created a movie, which tells me, hey, this worked A-okay. Perfect. Now, if I go to my console, you can see I get all of this information, and this is my request. So when we send in a request, it does send in all of this. You might think like, oh no, I have an error. You don't, you just have a request. Incoming message. So this is your request. Now, a lot of this stuff we don't need to worry about. There's only one portion kind of at the end that we really need and care about. And that is going to be our body. We got to find it. Let's find that within our there's a key. Maybe I'll just say, trust me on this. There's a key called body, and that's going to actually have all of my information that I passed in. It used to be at the very bottom, and alas, that's not the case anymore. Where is it at? Oh my goodness. Okay, so there is a key called body. Okay. I'm not going to just sit here. I promise you that there's a key called body. And so instead, let's do this. I'm going to console log body. This will show you. Cool. So now if I come back here and I make this request, I send it over. That's great. Now if I come here, I get still the same. Was there an error? Let me come my server. Make a request. Local host 8000 API source movies. We know our request is going through because we're getting a response. But what I'm confused about is, okay, not sure why that wasn't working or was acting weird. There you go. Life does not always work how you expect it. But we see that whenever we make a request, we are getting this information, right? I have my ID and specifically this is my request. And then within my request, there's a body key. This is what you're always going to deal with is your request.body. And so we have an ID, a title, and then a year. So what we can do within my code, now that I know that this is the case, what I can do is I could just say movies.push rec.body. Movies.push rec.body. So I'm grabbing the information from my request and I'm pushing it into my movies array. Again, this is emulating like if I were to have a database. And so now when I run this, I send, I still get this, but if I were to go here, you can see that I've got nothing. But if I send, I now have Walter Mitty. I've now added to my list of movies, which rules. Cool. Any questions on what we've talked about so far? Talked about getting kind of all things. We're just creating our first route, getting all of our movies, simulating our data. Now, one thing to note is if I kill this server and I start it again, it's going to start back at movies. It's not going to save that data. It's not a database. It's just on the server for right now. If I kept this running forever, it would remember it. It would remember Walter Mitty. But if I were to kill the server and restart it, it's going to reread everything. And so it's going to see all this. And it's just going to reset movies as these first three. So are there any questions on what we've talked about so far? Anything at all? Okay. We've got 8 minutes, so I'll show you one more thing. We're gonna kind of show just a portion of it. We're not gonna go and build out the entire functionality, but I want to show you in the same way that yesterday we dealt with use params, right? And we were able to grab some values from my route. I can do the same thing. So let's say I wanted to get movie by ID. What I could do is I could say app.get. Let's just do this right here. This is actually pretty advanced. Don't need to do this right now. This is actually going to work. But what I can do is I give my route app API/movies. And again, we always build off of this. We want to keep it succinct. We want to keep it done. And I have this same thing. So this is what's nice is it's kind of across the board. I have this ID portion here that is :ID. And because I have this colon, I'm saying, hey, this is dynamic. This is going to change. Just expect this to change or expect some sort of value here. And so within this, in the same way that I have a rec.body, there is this value called rec.params. And so if I were to just console log rec.params, which I will real quick. let's just message. We'll just say movie. That's fine. So if I were to come here and I say API/movie/1 and I send, we'll just get movie back. Okay, it worked great. If I look here, what? I'm wondering if, let's try this. Whatever it's the dot watch. Okay, let's come here. Great. Okay, maybe it's dot watch or dash watch. So I'm going to switch back to NodeMon because I'm not sure why this keeps giving me an error and not doing what I'm saying. Even though it did say when I started it that this is experimental, and so it's not going to work accordingly or work perfectly fine. It's weird though. Cannot find module. Anyways, okay. So if I say rec.params, if I have some sort of value in my route, I can use rec.params and I can go get that. So what I could do is, sorry, I'm clicking all over. I could say, knowing that information, knowing that I have access to those params, I could say, oh my goodness, what is going on? That ID, some ID is equal to rec.params.id. And that value that I was able to get right here, saying, okay, cool, I'm getting ID of 1, right? So I'm just saying, cool, ID equals 1. Now I could say movies.find movie. Now this is Mongoose, so we're not there yet. So this isn't going to work. But what we'll be able to do is say something like this and say, hey, give me the movie where the movie ID matches the ID that I have. So this is a little bit ahead. And then we respond with that movie. So this is how I could get 1 out of it. Now, we're not there yet. We don't have a database, so it's not going to work. But just wanted to show you this is how you could. Really, the most important thing is that we can grab this ID or any sort of parameter from my route, as long as it has this colon and then a name, and then we refer to that. That just creates a key in my rec.params. That's the key name, and then the value is whatever is passed through. So great. Any questions on anything we talked about? We kind of cruised and talked about a lot today. Any questions on where we're at? What we're doing? How are we feeling? 1 in the chat if that makes sense, but a 0 if it does not. Couple ones. Perfect. Okay. Well, that's all I have for you today, friends. As a reminder, if you can, if you're willing, if you can go to just our class thing and look at the mid-stack survey, click on that and fill this out. That would be super duper helpful for me and for Garrett. So other than that, I hope you guys have a wonderful night, and we will see you tomorrow.